Human design is distinct from astrology in that human design takes two calculations. It takes the calculation at the time of your birth, which is said to define your personality, your conscious mind, your characteristics of your mind, and the characteristics that you have conscious access to. So in this respect, it's the same as astrology. If you just look at your personality, that is the same as astrology. But human design takes a second calculation as well, 88 degrees retrograde motion of the sun. And there are reasons for this, but suffice it to say, the second calculation is called the design. So you have your personality and your design. And the design is simultaneously a map of the unconscious as well as a map of the body. So human design is form knowledge in the sense of the form, the body, that it's showing you, or it aims to show, a mechanic of how the body functions, how the body operates. And there's one fundamental premise at the core of human design, which is that the mind, our entire lives, the mind has been making decisions. And that the mind, the personality, alone, is making decisions based on what it thinks is good for the form. It's basically in control of the body. So, you're asked, do you want to live in this apartment? And the mind goes, well, here's the reason yes, and here's the reason no, and it makes all of its reasons, and it makes these decisions from a mental place. But human design shows physical mechanics that you can experiment with from the body, bodily intelligence. And I'll go into what these are. But the idea is that essentially the purpose of studying human design, there's a very clear goal or purpose, which is not to become more self-aware. I mean, that's maybe a side effect. But the idea is that self-awareness doesn't really change as much as surrendering to that bodily mechanic. And you start to build trust in it, and you start to experiment with it and see that it works, and you build trust. So I'll give a brief example of my own. I'm a generator, and you're also a generator, but we have a slightly different mechanic, which I'll go into. But being a generator, I have a mechanic with what is called the sacral center, and I can go into that in a moment. And the mechanic is very, very simple. It's the simplest thing in the world, really. It's that I'm going to make a sound which signifies yes or no. And I can learn to trust my sounds. So someone says, do you want to go to that movie? And I go, sounds pretty good. Well, do you want to see that movie? Yeah, that sounds really great. It means no, right? Because my tone of voice will change. I will be, it's like, am I speaking from my belly, from hara, like, Like, it's like, this is my bodily intelligence. There's a joke where, as a generator, I might say, I love you. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. But if you ask, do you love me? And I go, it means yes. So, whereas if I say, yeah, of course I do, of course, that's different. It's a different thing. So it's learning to trust a physical mechanic. So human design gives so much for the mind, and it's a feast. I mean, there's so much information, but the information is there so that the mind can observe and be aware and notice, ultimately to relax, to surrender, and to allow the body to take over, essentially. And there's something really beautiful about the generator in particular. It has what's called the sacral center, and sacral is like the word sacred. And it is kind of sacred because it's this amazing honesty where if you can actually make those reactions without thinking about it, there's something really beautiful about that. Compared to someone asks a question and my mind goes calculating. Oh, well, maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe I should say this instead, or, strategy or something like that. Um, the mind is beautiful too, but for human design, the mind, which is really the domain of the personality, has one purpose. Its purpose is to convey information. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm conveying information, I'm sharing what I've learned, I'm communicating my ideas and things I've learned, and that's great. I'm just not supposed to make decisions with it. It comes down to this fundamental dichotomy or split where the mind should be what they call outer authority, should be the authority for others. We each give our outer authority, but my inner authority is my sacral authority. So my inner decisions, do you want to go to this conference? Good, right? And I'll explain a little bit about how it's going to work for you, because you're also a generator, but you have another interesting mechanic. So the fundamentals of human design are really around learning to recognize your own physical mechanic and experiment with it and build trust in it, because it takes a while to build trust. I mean, when I heard about it, I thought it's kind of crazy. Like, what if somebody asks me, do you want to go ice fishing in Alaska? And I go, uh-huh. Like, what, I'm supposed to do it then? What then? I mean, it's kind of, and there's so many questions around, what will happen if will I still be a good person? Will I still be ethical? What if I'm just totally selfish? What if I'm, all these interesting questions come up. What happens when you surrender to that? So that's why the rest of the human design system really is about, if anything, it's exploring like the detail and the nuance and the beauty of how the mind does work. And I'll get into that in a moment. But the fundamental point is that they have what's called strategy and authority. And so as a generator, your strategy is to wait for that response, meaning waiting till you have a response. It's almost like someone's like testing and they're trying to make a sound or something to get like a bell to resonate, and it's like ding, 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 dong, and it resonates and you feel that, it's like it responds. It's waiting to respond. At a simple level, this could be you get up in the morning and you go to see your friend, and then you say, hi, how's it going? Good morning. That's not waiting to respond, and already is kind of on the wrong foot, and your friend might not even hear you because you're not really being yourself. It's interesting. I noticed myself initiating. Almost every day I do. I mean, it's hard not to. I tried to, when we were just downstairs, to get someone's, I tried to basically get attention by saying, oh, excuse me, didn't work, right? But if I sit there and then they notice me, so even like going to order a tea or a coffee, if I go up there and they're doing something else and I say, excuse me, immediately, like, they just hate me. Like, it's the immediate resistance. Whereas if I just stand there and then they say, oh, can I help you? And I say, yeah, here's what I would like, So it's almost like a dance. It's a dance where the generator is yin, to use the I Ching term. Yin and yang. Yin is receptive. It receives. And yang is active. It's putting out there. And so it's like we're in a dance, and we have to follow, we have to receive, we have to respond. So this is the fundamental strategy of the generator. Your authority, however, is different from mine. And the concept of authority is that part of you that will ultimately make the decisions. So my authority is sacral, like I was saying, which means I'm at the car sales shop and they say, do you want to buy this car? And I go, uh-huh. And then I buy the car because it's like, yeah, like I just get this feeling like I feel energized, I feel excited, I feel, I come to life, I feel animated, I feel like full of energy from that. And then it's good because that's my main authority. You have what is called solar plexus authority. And the solar plexus operates on a wave. And because it's connected to the sacral center, you'll still have sacral responses. Like, do you want this car? Uh-huh. Oh, yeah, I want this car. Like, you'll have that. The difference is that the solar plexus wave needs more time. It needs time. It is not supposed to make a decision either at the high point or the low point of the wave, or else it'll regret that decision, because the decision has to emerge naturally over time as a sort of clarity. So the thing to realize about the solar plexus, and you can experiment with this, is that you first find out about something, you first get some news, and it starts this wave. And sometimes the waves will be very short, sometimes they'll be much longer. And it takes that much longer to reach clarity, to make a decision. It really depends what it is, but someone asks, do you want to go on this trip? And you're immediately very excited about the trip. Well, at that point, it's important to resist the urge to say yes, because you might regret it later. You're so excited, and then later, oh, I wish I didn't say yes. Now I'm kind of regretting that. And vice versa, also not saying no at a low point of the wave. And what's interesting is, because you have that sacral response, you'll notice your own sounds you make and your tone of voice. If somebody were to ask you day after day, do you want to go on this trip? And you're like, uh-huh. And then like a few days later, do you still want to go on the trip? Yeah. And then a few days later, do you want to go on the trip? Well, I think so. I don't know. And it starts to change. And so the clarity emerges naturally over time as essentially as this wave moves, and it has to complete one full cycle. And it works in a number of... Oh, do you want...
No, I don't want.
No, we're good.
Nothing?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay, have a nice day.
Thanks. Yeah. And so that clarity is going to emerge over time, and it's going to work at a number of levels. Like, I had one friend who told me about it. Essentially, she said, I was really excited that you're my friend, Jonah, and I was really happy about that, but then we lost touch, and you stopped talking to me so much, and I was kind of angry at you, she was saying to me. I was mad at you because we lost touch, and I kind of just let go of our friendship and just forgot about it. I thought, who cares? And then a few weeks later, I started thinking of you again and thinking, you actually are a good friend to me. And so then she reached out. And so it was a wave. It was like very happy and excited to be my friend, and then kind of like disappointed, and then finally like let go. Like, doesn't matter. And then the clarity came, oh, actually, like, we are friends, So it moves, and you find that clarity, and it's actually a really beautiful process, because you get a very deep understanding of things from many different angles with this. You get to experience it in many ways. So the motto for the solar plexus authority, which is also called emotional authority, is there is no truth in the now. There is no truth in the now. And the main thing is to experiment with what happens if I say no. Or if I say not yet. If I say, give me more time. Not no, because no would be a decision, but I can't decide right now. I need a little more time. Can I get back to you in a few days? And things like this. And there's a real fear. There's a sense of urgency when you're on that high point of the wave. Someone offers you a job, and you're like, this is the best job ever. I'm going to be so happy in this job. Well, there's this urgency that's going to push you to say yes. And it's very difficult to go, I need a few days, because there can be this fear. What happens if they take the job away? What happens if they don't? This works for everything. This could be relationships. This could be... So one of the main things to realize is that with that solar plexus being defined, it's okay to make people wait. In fact, that makes you even more desirable, more appealing. Like, they're going to want to hire you even more, is what I'm trying to say. because of that. So it's good to play hard to get, or to give yourself enough time where you can continually be telling people, no, I need a little more time to decide. I haven't decided yet. And people will respect that. And that's something to experiment with, because there's this real fear that the opportunities will go away if we make people wait a little bit. So the other thing, in your particular case, you have a channel called the channel of intimacy that defines your solar plexus. And one of the important aspects of this particular channel is touch. So if you're having a hard time getting clarity about something, literally having a friend touch you on the shoulder or touch your hand can almost like jostle you into clarity about things. It's like there's a truth to touch for you because of the particular dynamic here. This is not the case for everyone who has solar plexus, but in your particular case, you might be not sure about something, and you see someone and you're still not sure, and you're talking and you're still not sure, and then they hug you. In the moment that you have physical contact, this clarity emerges. So it's just something to think about, is noticing that dynamic of clarity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the characteristics of your chart, and then I'm going to illustrate what human design calls the not self. And the not self is essentially the openness in your chart. Because if you look at your body graph, you'll see that you have various colored sections. These are the colored centers. And the areas that are colored in are the defined, consistent parts of you. The parts of you that you can trust. For instance, the solar plexus here. This is what is a consistent dynamic that will bring you clarity over time. Or that sacral energy, consistent dynamic. But then you look at the openness in the chart. You look at the undefined centers. And that openness in the chart is going to essentially be where you take in other people and are conditioned by other people. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing. What's the dilemma or the problem comes when we identify with it, and we try to have that, or we try to be that thing. And there's also openness in the chart between the areas of definition. You'll see that the sacral and the solar plexus are connected, separate from the spleen and the ego, separate from the G center and the throat. So you actually are what's called triple split, 3 different areas of definition. And the areas that, the openness that connects those areas will also be part of the not self. So I know this is a lot to take in, but
it makes sense.
Yeah. So essentially, I'll go over the characteristics first. And the reason I kind of say this is that usually when I tell people about characteristics of themselves, they just kind of go, okay, yeah, I get it. But when I start talking about the not self is where it's just like, oh my God, that's really, it's like the really juicy stuff, because the not self is where we run into problems. The not self is where we suffer. The not self, it's where we continually, it's where the mind is constantly pulling us away from our bodies, essentially. So just to give a brief example, I have a particular channel called the channel of concentration. And one of my characteristics, according to what I've read about this, and I can kind of see it, is that I have an intense, focused concentration sort of aura where I'm trying to make everybody focus. So I'm like, we're watching a TV or movie, I'm like, shush, just watch. Like I'm doing that. I've read about maybe these kinds of people are like a library sometimes. Like when I'm like, I've noticed myself, when I go out of a hall, I close the handle very quietly and close the door very quietly, and I'm very quiet, and I kind of, but the thing is, I was reading about this and I went, okay, I guess so. It didn't, it's like, it doesn't really it's cool to know, it's interesting to know that dynamic, but that didn't really, one, I had a hard time seeing it because I kind of am it, I guess. And then 2, once I knew, I was like, okay, fine, But then I start reading about the not self, and I'm just like, this is exactly my deepest, darkest fears and my innermost, conflict, I guess you could say. So I'll talk a little bit about the characteristics, but then really I'm going to talk more about the conflict or the not self, because that gets at the crux of human design, which is really about honoring your mechanical process of waiting for emotional clarity, right? That's your process of like, someone asks you what you think, and or if you want to do something or not, and waiting for that clarity to emerge over time, waiting for it to appear. And the not self is going to be there every step of the way saying, no, make this decision, make that decision, right? Trying to, the mind is going to be, so this is really what it's about. So talking about your characteristics, I touched on it briefly. You have the channel of intimacy from gate 59 and the sacral connecting to gate 6 and the solar plexus. This channel is about being able to get really close to people, getting through their defenses. And in some ways, it's being in control of intimacy. Like, it's being able to accept or reject, to be open or closed to intimacy with different people. In the sense that if they don't have that channel and you do, you're going to be the one who's in control or dominating or deciding whether that intimacy is there or not. Which is an interesting thing to think about, because you would think, isn't intimacy always between two people, kind of the decision is being made equally? But in some sense, this dynamic does actually get to do it. Now, making it even perhaps more difficult to notice the dynamic is that it's unconscious. So there are conscious and there are unconscious channels. Conscious channels, like you have, your other two are conscious. So maybe when I describe them, you might notice it more. Conscious channels, you kind of see how they work as they're working in real time. So it's a characteristic that you notice it happening. Unconscious, it's on autopilot, it's in the background, it's automatic. So like, here's another aspect of the channel of intimacy, is that, and I've seen this time and time again with people in my life who have this channel, they're really, really good at getting through somebody's defenses and essentially getting on their side or being friends with them or being like, brotherhood, sisterhood, like just connection, like making friends. And also disarming them. So if the other person is a little bit angry or aggressive or wants to fight, this is a channel that cuts through that and says, hey, no, let's find a way to... And so it's a really nice way. Like I have an example of this. I have a friend who was driving in a parking lot, and he pulled into a parking spot this other guy wanted to get. They both wanted the same spot. Mm-hmm. And the other guy gets out of the car and he starts swearing and saying, that was my spot. How could you? What the heck? And my friend, who has this channel, gets out and he says, there are many ways this can end, and it doesn't have to end poorly. It really doesn't. Mm-hmm. And he says to him, and the guy said, oh, he said, let's just, hey, if you want the spot, like, it doesn't have to be bad. It doesn't have to end, And then the other guy's like, okay, it was okay. So what I've noticed with this is, with this channel, it doesn't discriminate. So someone else could be like racist or sexist or just really like terrible, and everyone else goes, I hate this person, why are they being so bad? And this channel is kind of like, we'll still talk to them and we'll still like show that same sort of connection of being like treating them as a brother or sister, just kindness, gentleness.
I'm just thinking about my former work as a psychologist in jail, with murders, with pedophiles.
Yeah.
I had a lot of clients that nobody else took in. They said, how can you take in this person? But still they had the right to have help.
Yeah.
So I recognize this very much from those people that I noticed that were very hard for others to work with.
That is so interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's an interesting point about it also is you'll see that it.
And they were very angry, very defensive.
Right, and this can cut through the defenses. I say it cuts through auras like butter. Like someone has an aura of like pain or something, and this just cuts right, or gets right through. There's another interesting point. So you'll see that it's on this side, and there's another one on the other side, like that. And those two together are called the defense circuit. And this isn't really specific to your chart, but just kind of a funny anecdote, just like a teaching anecdote. So the 59-6 is about intimacy, and it's essentially about, it's like something, these two together are to make sure that the human race, the human species, stays alive and keeps producing.
Yeah.
So at a species level, they're to make sure the humans stay alive. And so 59-6 is to make sure that there is intimacy. Ultimately, to make sure that there is sex, to make sure that there is pregnancy, that there are more children being made. And so because of that, it's by definition, it's supposed to be ultimately at the end of the day, not discerning. Now, this doesn't mean you won't be discerning, make decisions, but it's like, it's designed to, if you're on a desert island with one other person, to find a way to have intimacy with them to keep the human species going. Like, it's a funny idea, right? Yeah. Now, this other side is about child raising. It's about raising children, and it's the exact opposite. It's supposed to be the most discerning and the most careful. And if you think about how for 18 years the parents are raising children, they care what the kid eats, what the kid does, what the kid watches, what the kid goes to school, what the kid wears, who the kid's friends are. Imagine reversing that, and you spend 18 years deciding whether you want to have sex with someone or not. You know what I mean? Like, it's such a funny idea.
Okay.
Really, and then like the kids, you're just like, do anything you want. Like, so no, I mean, that's a little bit of a simplification, but
it's interesting.
It's a funny idea. I just wanted to share that because it's you can see the parallel.
And I know how I use that one. At least I noticed I was different than other workers.
Yeah, and that you're able to really connect with people in a way that's non-judgmental, and people can really open up, and also I do want to say that, like I was saying earlier, in it, you control the level of intimacy. So if you feel like you don't want to have intimacy with someone, you can also close that off, because it's not just like you will be intimate with anyone. No. This is very much about, it's potentially able to look past things, but it's also very much in control of. So it is basically about that dynamic of, and it's the other thing I can say about this characteristic is that it's tribal, and there's different kinds of circuitry in human design, where different channels have different qualities to them, and the qualities. There's a number of sub-circuits, but the three primary circuit groups are individual, tribal, and collective. And we could talk for hours about each one of those because they're such wide topics, but at the high level, the individual is about personal empowerment, where they're essentially trying to prevent others from interfering with them. Okay. And the tribal is about support and about connecting to people to have support network together. Like family is very tribal, partnership, marriage, love relationship, these kind of things. Friendship is actually pretty tribal. Like most interaction is at a tribal level. And then collective is more like an impersonal version of that. If I publish a book and it's read by strangers, I'm contributing to the collective. And then strangers, and collective will also work with strangers a lot, and it will, collective circuitry is like ready for any stranger to come along, and it's ready to share with them. And so sharing is different from support. Collective might share its resources. Like, I only have collective circuitry. I only have collective channels. So the way that I'm designed is essentially to share. I love sharing this kind of thing, but I might even share resources. I might share money. I might share food or drink. I might share ideas, opinions, experiences. Let's go on an adventure together and have an experience. And, I'm sharing all these things, but it's a little bit impersonal. I've had people tell me before, maybe a more tribal person, or I guess individual is even they take this very personal, where, well, yeah, Jonah, you're very nice to me, but you're nice to everyone. Or like, yeah, you love me, but you kind of love everyone. Like there's kind of like it's a little different dynamic. So this is all to say that the channel of intimacy that you have here, the 59.6, is a tribal channel, and that's why it's connected to touch. Because if you think about tribes, so much of the tribal motif is about handshakes and making agreement and hugs and holding and all of this physical touch and and taste, sharing food together and smell, how the person smells. All these things are very much the tribal thing.
I've been working in Africa on the bush.
Really?
Yeah, and that really reminds me of that, because you touch each other, you have your handshakes, you have your food together. It's really the tribal stuff.
Yeah, this is how it stays together and bonds. And then you have another tribal channel. Let me see what... I want to get the official names right. I have my own connotation for these. Like I have my own version of them, but I just want to make sure I tell you the right name. I think it's the channel of the transmitter. Let me see. Pretty sure. Well, yeah. So I have always called it the channel of the transmitter, which is kind of an interesting name for it. I think that's the official name. There's various people do their own keynote or like words to associate with the channels, and you can find that there are official keynotes or words given by Ra Uru Hu, and then there are a number of others that people have done to describe them. But I think it's the channel of the transmitter. That's what I just want to pull up my... I just want to tell you the right thing to make sure. And that's another tribal channel that you have, and I'll show you right where it is, because I love that human design is so visual, so that, and really you should be looking at this the whole time while I do it, but the 4426, that one, and that's another tribal channel, and I can tell you a little bit about how that works. But again, this isn't the really juicy stuff. We're going to get to the not self, and that's where we get to the where we get to the juicy stuff. Yeah. So 26. Oh, this one's calling it the channel of surrender. So the channel of surrender. That's a really interesting name for it. I'm wondering why they're calling it that. But in any case, I can describe a little bit about how that one works. So 44 is in the spleen, and the spleen is all about intelligence. And so there's all different kinds of intelligence, and they're intelligence for different purposes and for different things. And this is a tribal intelligence, and so the tribal is often related to money, to material welfare, to having enough food, having enough resources, having shelter, and all of these kinds of things. And so the 44, in that case, is going to have this intelligence in these areas. Like I think of it as being good at finding real estate, good at investment. It's essentially, I joke that channel is the channel of capitalism, and then the 4037 is channel of communism, because 4037 is all about basically making a bargain to all support each other, and 4426 is more capitalist. It's more about knowing what investments to make to have like material success in some way, and it's very entrepreneurial, like starting its own business sometimes, or it can have a number of expressions. The 26 is an interesting one, because with 26 it gives you a lot of nerve, and again, because you have this, you might not notice it, but you might, where the 26, someone who has gate 26, can basically stand up in front of a bunch of people and sell themselves and sell something. And they can say, they have the nerve to say, I'm good at this, I'm good at this, I'm good at this, and this is what I've done, and this is what I'll do for you. And so it's kind of like, and they know what the other wants to hear. Like it's a really good like salesy kind of, like even if like somebody asks you, like with having gate 26, it might like flash for a moment. Like I joke that the first thing they say is always what the other person wants to hear, and then they know how to kind of, how to. But having that, it have a number of different expressions, but I definitely think of it as like being nervy. Like I don't know if you have that expression, but nerve, yeah, having a certain nerve to be able to like go in there and like, wow, look at that person had some nerve, like able to go in there and just kind of and sell things. And usually they're good at it can be just really good at managing resources, good at I know people who have this channel who are directors of schools where they're doing a lot of hiring and they're deciding and doing a lot of like actual resource management of just deciding where to put the money and where the money goes and what to do with the money and things like that. And it's also tribal. And then the last one is the 8-1. You'll notice that from the G center to the throat, or the 1-8, I guess you could say. And the 1-8 is one of my favorite channels. I know you're not supposed to have favorites. Like they're all supposed to be equal. It's just I just have to. Yeah. The 8-1 is called the channel of inspiration, and gate 1 is the very first hexagram in the I Ching. There's 64 hexagrams in the I Ching, and gate 1 is the first one, and it is all yang lines, all solid lines, just 6 solid lines. And so much has been written about that particular hexagram. You can read Carl Jung, talking about that hexagram. You can read, Richard Wilhelm, all these different books just analyzing the I Ching long before human design about that particular hexagram.
Oh, interesting.
And that's true of all the hexagrams, but gate 1 is so significant because it's the first one and it's fully yang, and so is gate 2 is very significant too. It's fully yin. Gate 2 is just all broken line, whereas gate 1 is all solid lines. Okay. And so gate 1 is often called the creative. And it's basically creativity. It's the creative spirit, and it comes from the G center, which is all about the self and self-identity and self-expression. And it's an individual channel, so it's very empowered. And because it connects to the throat, I would say it's being empowered to be yourself and say what you want, and basically, I see it in a lot of entertainers, a lot of performers, a lot of people who really just are themselves and are not afraid to express themselves, because the throat is all about how you talk and what you're saying to people, and then it's connected directly to this like center of who you are. Now, I will say that all individual channels go through different phases, and they have these creative outbursts, very creative. But there are also times where nothing happens, and the individual gets really bored and will actually get melancholic, waiting for the change to happen or waiting for the creative burst. Mm-hmm. So there can be times with that 8-1 where instead of verbal creativity and having these creative breakthroughs in the ways you express yourself, there can be periods of melancholy. And that's part of individual circuitry. And so whenever someone has an individual channel like that, I always tell them to remember that the times when you're melancholic and you feel melancholy are actually very fertile for creativity. Mm-hmm. It's like getting ready for some creative thing.
I call it the resting phases. It's like resting before the next peak of something.
Yes, exactly. Resting before a big... Yeah. And it's interesting because... I don't have that. I'm a collective being, and I don't have it. And it's funny because, people who have individual, what I found is, anyway, from talking to them and from hearing about it, I'm kind of jealous in some ways. It's funny. I guess the more I deepen my experiment with human design, the less jealous I am. But when I first learned it, I was like very jealous of all these different things I would read about and learn, and because it's like there's something very alluring about that. And also that individuality only has one obligation. Its only obligation is to keep others from interfering with it. Yeah. So it's funny because we can think of these in terms of obligations. Like I have an obligation to share, basically. I'm a collective person. Yeah. So sharing for me, when I share, everything just works. And that's my thing. With your tribal gates, they have an obligation to support, and they have an obligation to be supportive, to people that you're close to and things like that, and to be like this when they're having a hard time, they can depend on you. and things like that. But the individual only has one obligation, which is basically to stay true to itself. And it's funny because people get really mad at you if you don't live up to the obligations. Do you know the filmmaker David Lynch? Have you ever seen David Lynch?
Yeah, I think so,
He only has one channel, and it's individual. And it's actually the what they call format individual channel. So it's the source of all individuality in the chart. So it's like the super individual channel. And he only has one. And people love him and they love his films. But when he was doing the original Twin Peaks, everyone hated him in the second season because the producers came in and they interfered and they changed it. And people were so mad at him. Yeah. It's like he had one job, just to ignore everybody else and basically and be himself. So you can see how that works. It's so funny. We hate when some really creative person is interfered with, and it's it's just a dynamic about it. So
it makes sense. And if I do something out of just because I know I should do it like this, or the society wants me to do it like this, it goes to hell, right? I get a lot of shit. Even if I did it right, if I did everything right, it's going to go to shit. Then when I do things that I don't, when I have the mentality, I don't care shit. And everybody likes me. Suddenly. I'm like, oh my God.
That's exactly so it.
Illogical.
Well, and it's so funny because the individual isn't even trying to empower others. They're just trying to have their own experience or their own, but as a side effect, others are empowered because they say, there's somebody who doesn't care what other people think. There's somebody who's expressing themselves fully. It gives others permission to, it inspires them. And so even though I don't have individual circuitry, I've been inspired, and I've had a lot of, I've kind of thought about this, how we all condition each other. Just like I was telling you earlier, I have that channel of concentration. If you have an essay to write, or if you are doing your taxes, sit next to me, because just sitting next to me, you will have that concentration, right? And similarly, being around you, people will be more verbally creative, and they'll feel more empowered to express themselves more. So it's really interesting what impact we have on each other. In human design, the idea of the aura is that we don't even have auras. We kind of are. Like the body extends to an invisible part of the body. The aura is still the body. It's just like the invisible, and it extends maybe about roughly one more arm length past where we are. And when you're in somebody's aura, you can feel it. I mean, you can feel the effect they're having on you. So one of the sayings in human design is to let your aura do the talking, meaning that a lot of times just being in someone's presence is all it takes to have some sort of impact. So those are the three channels that you have. I'm gonna move on to the. I'm gonna continue on with it. So I'll tell you a little more about the characteristics. I guess profile would be a really good thing to cover before we'll finish on the not self, because the not self is kind of heavy and it's kind of intense. So we'll finish on that, but profile is a really fascinating and beautiful aspect of human design. So you'll see that your personality, Sun, Earth, this is where the Sun was at the time of your birth. It's actually in the 6th line of gate 14. That's what that number 6 there means. And then design, which was again 88 degrees retrograde of the Sun, so roughly 88 days before your birth. It was in the 2nd line. So this makes you a 6-2 profile. And so there are 6 lines in the I Ching, the 6 lines of the hexagram. And so basically, if you visualize how the hexagrams are laid out in the zodiac, they're connected to the signs. You've seen that, they're within the signs. Well, as the sun or any planet is moving through them, it's moving through 1st line, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. Then it moves to the 1st line of the next hexagram. And so that's how the sun is moving. It's moving through the lines of the hexagram. And so it's basically another subdivision within hexagram. And what's interesting is there are unique interpretations of each line. There's 64 hexagrams and 6 lines, so there's 384 total lines. But the other thing is that in some ways, there's a commonality with all of each line. So like all 6 lines have a commonality. Like if you read all 64 hexagrams and you read their 6th line, you start to see a theme.
Oh.
They all have a theme, and it's really interesting to do this and to see kind of what is the theme of that line. And I'll just really briefly go over the lines just to give you an idea of it, kind of like an evolutionary process.
Yes.
And then I can talk about the 6 too. So starting with the first line, so first of all, the hexagrams, the lines count from the bottom. So if you look at a hexagram and it has the lines on it, the lines are from the bottom. And often the metaphor will be of a house, because you can kind of see the hexagram like a house. You see these lines, and there's like a house. And so the bottom, the first line is the foundation. And it's basically the very first step in this evolutionary process, where you can almost think about it like the caveman, cavewoman stage of development, where, and there's so many different ways of understanding it. It's actually really beautiful. I highly recommend just reading about, I can give you PDFs, or just if you're interested, you can learn about the lines, because the lines are so beautiful to see how they progress. But the first line, it essentially has a theme of it wants to have a solid foundation, and it's driven by fear. It's like fundamental fear of the unknown, fear of, danger. And that fear leads to intelligence, and it leads to learning. It leads to being able to teach eventually, and all of these things that come out of that, and that are first line themes. And so if you imagine like cavemen and cavewomen, and they're afraid of a snake, so then they learn, they know there's snakes there, and then they learn, and they are able to talk and communicate and say, don't go there, that's where the snakes are. So they teach, and then they become intelligent about it. But then they keep learning, and they keep learning. And so the first line, all it really wants to do is learn. It's very introspective. It just wants to learn. It just, it's also this deep wisdom of, if we're going to survive, the strong and the weak need to be bound together. The strong and the weak. So it's this very deep wisdom of like, it doesn't make sense if the weak and the weak are together, and the strong and the strong. Like, we want to survive, like the strong and the weak, obviously. And because of that, it's very humble, and it knows its place. And so the first line is very self-aware of what they're bad at. So a first line might even say, I've been studying this for years and years, and I'm really bad at this and this and this, but I'm pretty good at this and this and this. And what they do is they tend to align themselves with masters, or with authorities, or with experts. And they basically want to learn. And so they're the apprentice, or they're the student who becomes the teacher. And they go through this long trajectory of learning over thousands and thousands of hours. By the time you get to the second line, which is your unconscious line, so this is actually relevant to you, but I'll come back to it. The second line doesn't want to learn anymore. In fact, oftentimes second lines are forced to be more like first lines. And so they might say, oh yeah, I like learning, I enjoy it. But once they're really deconditioning and following their body, their body doesn't really want to do that. It doesn't want to spend... So the second line has a very different dynamic. It's like, it's not the foundation anymore. It doesn't care about the foundation. It already has a solid foundation. It's like the ground floor. And the second line dynamic is that second lines have natural talents, amazing natural talents. But in exchange for that natural talent, like being really, really good at something, they have a hard time knowing what it is. So it's a trade-off. The first line is very self-aware of what they're good and bad at. But they start bad at everything. So the first line starts bad and has to get good. The second line starts like at the top with certain things, but they might be really confused about it and might say, I'm not a very good cook, but it turns out they make amazing food. Then they might be like I'm really good at this and this and this, and it turns out like I'm a great driver, and you're like, what? No, terrifying. So the funny thing, so what happens with the second line is that the second line can actually discover what they're good at, but they need other people. And the problem is other people are constantly projecting on them. People are projecting what they think that they're good at. And it's not always true, but people are constantly seeing things in them, right? So it's a projection line where people are constantly saying, you should do this, you should do that. The second line, and so because it's unconscious for you, it's interesting to see whether this dynamic plays out in your life, but it very well might. People might actually be saying that you should a lot. I mean, it's a little bit different whether it's conscious or unconscious. So it's a little different how it works out, because it's basically you have a second line body. So it's a little bit different than having a second line mind. You know what I mean? Because you're a 6 too. But anyway, the second line in general is about being called. You should do this, you should do that, you should do this. And people eventually, the second line just gets tired of it and says, leave me alone. And so it gets called the hermit. And it's not really the hermit because it doesn't like people. It's just the hermit because the second line, if I had to summarize it, I would say that it's about living it. The first line wants to learn about it. The second line just wants to live it. It's like putting it into practice. Like why read a bunch of books about it if I can just do it? Yeah. There's a very much, I am existentially living my life. And a lot of it is just like being. And it's actually a really beautiful thing how it can be so engrossed in being and just being natural. It's very natural. Second lines are very natural in their own skin. I have a first line unconscious, and the first line is always a little insecure. It's always a little rigid. It's always a little bit anxious and stressed. And the first line is like always a little contrived and all these things. And the second line, like, they're just naturals. Like people just see them as being very natural and comfortable in their own skin, just kind of a natural process. I'll kind of hurry through these because I don't want to derail, and I could talk about this for hours.
Yeah,
I love. Okay, but so as we go through these processes, they keep building and building. You know, the first line wants to learn about it. The second line just wants to live it. Well, the third line wants to test it. They want to test it all out. And so the third line is basically all about experimenting. And this is actually particularly relevant to you because even though you're a sixth line, the sixth line is the only one that has the special case where until the first Saturn return, they are third line, essentially.
Oh, okay.
They are third line. So you live the third line until that Saturn return. And in fact, it doesn't change on a dime. It's not like it changes in one night. The Saturn return starts a cycle which typically takes, I would say, around a quarter of a Saturn cycle, like 7 years.
Yeah.
And maybe like 3.5 years you start to feel it, and by 7 years it's fully changed. And so the third line in the house metaphor is like the stairway up from the ground floor to the second floor, if you will. The sixth line is the roof of the whole house. And the reason that they call it that is that the sixth line, which I'll get to in a minute, by the time you've gone through this whole process, the sixth line is like aloof and detached and objective and kind of outside of life by the time it actually gets there. And so the funny dynamic for the sixth line is that in their third line phase, they're doing so much experimentation and trial and error, and they're making a lot of mistakes because that's what the third line does. It knows how to like make all the mistakes to see what happens. Like, I'm not going to listen to what anybody else says. I'm going to do it myself. Third line is very scientific. It's like, can you imagine if scientists just trusted each other? No, they're like, I'm going to see for myself if that works, you know. So that's what the third line, to prove it, yeah, exactly. This is the third line thing. So again, like first line wants to learn about it, second line wants to live it, third line's like, let's see what you first and second lines are really made of. Let's see if the first line really does know their stuff. Let's see if the second line really is talented. Let's test it. And this is true for every hexagram, by the way. It's really a beautiful thing when you start to look at a hexagram and you look at, you know, and you can start to do this where you can be like, for instance, I have gate 12, which is a gate of articulation, speaking articulately. Yeah, it's in the throat right there. It's all about articulation. And the first line of gate of articulation is all about what is articulation? Let's figure it out. Let's find out, you know, and like they want to learn about how to communicate in that way. The second line doesn't want to be bothered with any of it. It's just going to talk. It's just going to do it. And it's not going to reflect on it at all. It's just going to like do what it does. I have the third line in it, so I'm constantly experimenting and trying different ways of articulating and seeing what works and what doesn't, and what happens if I try this approach, what happens if I try that approach. So, anyway, you can see how it works for all these. But So the third line being very experimental, it can get really, really pessimistic because part of the pessimism comes from nothing ever works right. In a way, the third line is here to find what doesn't work. It's here to be a little bit of an anarchist and to just really to make mistakes. And it seems like making mistakes, like why would anyone be designed to make mistakes? Why? But scientific breakthroughs happen from mistakes. Everything, like growth, learning, like all these things happen through making mistakes. And so the best thing I tell people who are third line, which doesn't fully apply for you because you're now in the sixth line phase, but for people some people are third line their whole life. Their whole life is a life of making mistakes, you know. It's a really interesting dynamic, but they end up getting pessimistic, but also resilient, so resilient and like able to laugh about it. Like they're pessimistic, but they like nothing ever works right, but it's okay. Life is fine anyway. Like they laugh about like how everything is always broken, you know. But they have a really good purpose. I mean, they're the ones who find out what the side effects of drugs are. They're the ones who find out. You know, I have a friend who's a third line who literally asked me, Jonah, I have a client, I'm making a website for them. Do you think it'll work if I use this kind of database with this kind of thing here and that? And I was like, no, that's not going to work. It doesn't work at all that way because I know this doesn't work. And he's like, okay, got it. 2 weeks later, hey, so I tried it, it didn't work. I'm just like, okay, well, good, you checked it out. So the third line, though, can really get beat up. And the other thing is that people who are third lines are designed to handle it. And I have a lot of empathy for sixth lines because sixth lines are much more fragile. You'll see by the time I get to the sixth line process describing it, really, like, sixth lines are here for this really beautiful, almost transcendent purpose. Like, their kinds of bonding are like soulmate bonding, for instance. Third lines are all about making and breaking bonds over and over. Like third lines are very much like start a relationship, stop it, go like trial and error, try this, try that. But sixth line really wants that role model. So it's very different being a sixth line going through that third line. Sorry, wants the soulmate. Sixth line is also called a role model, like because it's kind of like that's a little complex, but I'll say that the sixth line really wants a soulmate. So it's very hard for them, like in their 20s. I don't know if this was your experience or not, and you don't have to comment on this, but there's typically this like wanting that soulmate and having that soulmate connection, and then just being totally crushed and being like so like put through the ringer. Happens a lot for them. Like they just get completely demolished.
Yeah, I've been through that.
Yeah, and it's just like really life puts the sixth lines through the grinder. But there's a reason for it. And so okay, so I'll wrap up so we get up to there. So the fourth line is the foundation of the second floor. The fourth line is the burgeoning of the transpersonal. I forgot to mention that the first line doesn't really see anybody outside of itself. I'm talking about personality here, first line personality. First line's not that aware of other people. Second line is aware of them, but mostly as annoying, like telling me what to do all the time. Third line like starts to get aware, but it's kind of like experimenting. Like third line's like bumping into them and noticing them, but doesn't really, you know. Fourth line actually really does notice other people, and the fourth line doesn't care about learning about things. They don't care about living it or being it. They don't really care about testing and seeing if it works or not. All they care about is transmitting it. All they care about is influencing others. So you can get fourth lines who, if they have a good thing that they're transmitting, can be amazing for spreading and influencing people with what they're spreading. And they actually do care very much about how they're conveying the message. And like, it's all about like being the best at getting the message out. But then you also have fourth lines who think the earth is flat. And they're just going to tell everyone they know that the earth is flat, you know, and they're never going to question it. They're never going to learn about it. They're never going to like actually live as though the earth is flat. They're never going to try any other, you know. So it's funny how that works. The fourth line can get really fixed in what it transmits. There's a lot of interesting dynamics about the fourth line, but I'll just keep going. The fifth line is basically the core or the heart of the transpersonal process. Because the trigrams, the hexagram is 6 lines, but it's split into 2 trigrams of 3 lines each. And there's a lower trigram and an upper trigram. Lower is, again, 1, 2, 3, and it's a very personal process, and then 4, 5, 6. You're 6, so you're at the very top. And here's the interesting thing. The 5th line is like, so the 5th and 6th are very transpersonal. We both are, in that we have very good mental models of other people. You know, I'm a 5th line, you're a 6th line. We definitely, we have mental models of how other people work. We see the dynamics. We understand human nature a lot. But there is a big difference. 5th and 6th lines actually tend to get along really well, and they can support each other in various ways. I can go into that in a moment. But the interesting thing is this. The 5th line is the core of the transpersonal process, and so it's actually this extremely passionate transpersonal process, whereas the 6th line is almost like, it's like the 5th line is like the climax of the symphony, or the climax of the story or the narrative. The 6th line is the denouement, the after, right?
Oh, okay.
After the big thing happens. And the 6th line is there to kind of be this transitional line and to be a little bit outside of the process. It's almost like, it's often said that there actually are almost like only 5 lines, and then the 6th line is like after the end, which is such a funny idea. You get these ideas in I Ching, like like hexagram 63 in I Ching is called after completion, and hexagram 64 is called before completion. And like, what a bizarre idea that like the next to last, you know what I mean? Like, there's such funny ideas in this. So the 6th line is like after the end, kind of like, it's like this, and that's why in the house, the house metaphor, the 5th line is like the 2nd floor, and the 6th line is actually the roof. And so it's on the roof, symbolically meaning that it's able to look down and to see how everyone else is living. And so what happens is, when it goes on the roof, after that Saturn return, it goes from, I'm going to see what happens when I do it. I'm going to break my heart a million ways by doing this and that and that. Finally, I'm going to try it out. I'm going to see what happens if I walk up to this person and tell them that, And then it goes on the roof, and finally it goes, I'm going to see what happens when other people do that. I'm going to see how their relationships work or not. I'm going to see how their friendships work. I'm going to see what happens when they start that kind of a business. I won't see for myself. I'll just watch everyone else. And so it can become very detached and aloof. And especially the 6-2, because there's another variation of the 6th line profile called the 6-3. And so they have a 3rd line unconscious that's pulling them into things. But because that 2nd line is a hermit, the 6-2 is very much connected to being in this kind of aloof place of being a little bit outside of things. And the interesting thing is, it becomes very objective. It becomes so objective. Me as a 5th line am never objective. I'm always selling you the thing that I believe is right. And so I'm basically, the other part of it is that the 5th line, like me, I'm always staking my reputation on anything I do. Because the 5th line very much is only trusted insofar as their reputation. If they have a good reputation. If they have a bad reputation, if it gets damaged, they're not going to be trusted. Because it's very subjective, me as a 5th line. The 6th line, people pick up on this objectivity. There's no guarantee that you'll get there. Like, some 6th lines kind of stay in their 3rd line process much longer or refuse to get out of it. But in general, the 6th line will have an objectivity that people start to trust, because they know that you're not biased, that you're going to tell them that you don't have a stake in it, because you're kind of outside of it in a way, and you're like a neutral observer, a neutral outside. So the joke is that the 5th line, which is called the heretic, that's me, because the 5th line is so heretical against the status quo. The 5th line comes to town and tells everybody, a flood is coming, you guys have to flee. And then the townspeople don't know what to do, and they don't know whether to trust the 5th line or not. So they go to their fool on the hill. They go outside of town, and that's the 6th line. And the 6th line is like innocent and kind of objective and, and on their own. And they ask the fool on the hill, should we trust this person or not? and then that the sixth line decides. And if the sixth line says yes, then the fifth line is celebrated as a hero. And if the sixth line says no, the fifth line is burned at the stake or run out of town with a pitchfork.
So terrible.
Yeah, those are the yeah.
Okay.
But the funny thing is, the sixth lines can actually save a fifth line's reputation. If a fifth line gets a really bad reputation, the sixth line can tell people, you know what, they're not that bad.
So you better stay in touch with me.
Yeah, I need it. I need exactly. I need that. No, so it's a funny thing though. It's funny how the lines work, but
Yeah.
but essentially the sixth line has this amazing potential where it moves through the third line phase. It goes up on the roof, and then the most beautiful, magical thing happens at the Chiron return. And so this is a really interesting part. If human design really pays attention to the first Saturn return, not as much to the second one, the first Saturn return, and then to the Chiron return. And the Chiron return is usually around 53 years old, something like that. And that initiates the third phase for the sixth line. And everybody has this to a degree, but the sixth line is like the exemplar of it, like the real one that has this, where it actually goes beyond the binary, and that's where the sixth line comes back down off the roof and re-enters life. And re-enters life from a place that's kind of like non-binary, kind of like neither wave nor particle, like neither, because, you know, it's moving towards pessimism in the first cycle, and then Saturn returns, starts to move back towards optimism. So by the time of Chiron, it becomes more optimistic about life. And then once it hits post-Chiron, it's like so singular that there's almost no descriptions of it. It's a very, very singular kind of thing. And it's funny because it's called the role model, but it's not like an archetype. It's not like the role model fisherman, or it's not like the role model, you know, the police officer or whatever. It's like the role model of themselves. Like they become a role model of who they really are, so that other people want to emulate them because of how singular they are and how like in their own life they are, and how much themselves they are, and things like that. But there's a lot more to the sixth line. It's a very complex one. And it's actually, it's probably the most complex profile. I mean, I can do a first line profile reading all day, but the sixth line one, there's so many interesting parts about it. And as you learn about it, it's a transitional profile. So the other thing, and I'll wrap this up because I don't want to exhaust you, but
no, I'm really interested.
I can talk about this for days.
Okay,
You know,
okay, now my headache is gone.
Good.
I'm getting very inspired by this.
Oh,
so
good.
feeling
I'm
very
glad.
good.
I'm glad. So the last thing I'll say about the sixth line is just something that I love to do, because I read the lines of the hexagrams going around the wheel. And you know that they're always in the same order. I mean, they're in the same order of the zodiac and the hexagram order. They go around the same, you know, and I love to follow them. I love to follow the moon transits, for instance, where every 28 days the moon goes through all the, you know, or I follow the sun transits. I follow others too, but I love to kind of just follow along, and I learn about each line. And it's so interesting because each line, I wonder if I could do it for yours. I'm not quite good enough yet at doing this. Yeah, I don't think I can do it for yours, but I'll just give just a little taste of what I'm talking about here. Each of the hexagrams leads to the next one, and what's interesting is, like I was saying, the first line is like, what is this all about? I want to learn about it. The second line wants to live it. Third is experiment. Fourth is transmit. Fifth is kind of the hero of it. The fifth line, I didn't tell you this about the fifth line. The fifth line is if I disappoint somebody, they like lose a little bit of faith in humanity. Because the fifth line is kind of like, it's like, if he can't do it, nobody can, kind of thing. So the fifth line has all this pressure to do it. But the sixth line is kind of like, whatever the theme of that hexagram is, whatever it's all about, the sixth line is kind of like, that's kind of old hat. What we really need is the next one, because it's preparing to transition to the next one. And so just as a quick example, there's, so gate 16 is the gate of skills. And gate 16 is all about developing skills. So first line, what are skills? Second, wanting to live out the skills, you know, and it keeps going. By the time it gets to the sixth line, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm good at all this stuff, but what I really need, like what I really need is, or what I need for the skills rather, is looking to the next thing. Like if I really want to develop those skills, I need, and it needs gate 35, which is the gate of experience, of having had experience. So it's kind of like by the time it gets there, it's like, yeah, skills are okay. What I really need is experience. If I want to get those skills, I got to have that experience first. You know, like I have to like go out there in the world because like they're very different. Like 16 is all about like being in a room by yourself, like practicing, and 35 is going out there in the world and having this adventure. So it's like the 16 is like, I'm tired of this. Like what I really need in the sixth line is the experience. Well, then you get to the end of the experience, right? And it's you go through it. You get to the sixth line, and the sixth line there is looking at the next one, 45, which is money. If I really want to have the experience, what I really need is money. And so then it goes there. And then you get to 45, and I forget the next one, but it's like, well, if I want money, what I really need is, and it's like, intelligence or something. And you get there. And so it tells a really beautiful story where each one like needs the next one in this really beautiful sequence as it goes around. So
that's wonderful.
Okay, so, all right, so, I mean, I could talk about profile for hours, but but the thing, so what I'm going to talk about now, I can put this over here.
Jealousy and stuff, or?
Yeah, I want to do the not self.
Yes.
So it's interesting being, well, I'll tell you a little bit about being triple split. So triple split is very rare, and what it means is that you have these three different aspects of yourself. So very multifaceted. It's very different from someone like me, for instance, where I have single definition, and I just have these three centers defined, and they're just connected like that. And it's kind of like with me, it's like what you see is what you get. Like I'm always going to be kind of the same person every time you see me, or different people. You ask different people about me. Whereas with you, you might always be the same to me, but you're going to be pretty different for somebody else, because to me, I am connecting only these two. I'm connecting this area to this area because I have the 2946, so I bridge that for you. I connect those. So what dynamic you're going to be expressing on me is this, whereas somebody else might have 10 or something, and then they're going to connect these other ones. And different people are going to, so basically like you have all different ways that you can connect. Like I think of it almost like it's multifaceted, like a gemstone. You're looking from different angles and you're seeing different facets. And there's other interesting dynamics to triple split. For one thing, in order to fully digest information or fully absorb information, it's important, at least temporarily for periods of time, to have people bridge those splits. So say you're sitting by yourself, totally alone, and you're taking in a lot of information, or you have some event happen. Some event happens that you need to process, to digest. And what's going to happen is, as soon as you're around people that bridge certain areas, you're going to start to have realizations and epiphanies, because it's almost like the information accumulates on the edge there, and it doesn't...
with other people I can get those connections that I need to...
And so one piece of advice that I say for a triple split is to periodically, like once or twice a week, or just whenever you can, go out to a cafe. And chances are the random people walking by, some of them, sitting next to you, will bridge those, and you're going to temporarily get access to these kinds of things. And I've even seen the dynamic with the splits happen in partnership, where it's funny. You can take two people, whether they have split or not, or single definition, but then together they have a split, because when you combine the chart, you overlay them, and together they have a split. Well, what will happen is they'll have something happen, and they'll resolve it on their own, and then a few days later, a friend will come over, or they'll be out in public, and they'll start fighting about it, and they'll be like, "I thought this was over," and it's like, because finally, like, it was able to kind of connect. So basically, it's almost like an information metabolism, or how it's digested. There's a lot of other interesting things about triple split, and honestly, it's such a rare type that I haven't done a lot of readings where I go into triple split.
How rare? What is it? I mean, what means rare?
Well, maybe not that rare, I guess, but 8% maybe, or it might be more. I think what it really is that I just don't. I guess I've done readings for triple split. I just haven't had a ton to say about it, because I don't fully It might be 10%. So 1 in 10. It's not so rare, but it's
It
not
was
like
still quite not so.
yeah,
People,
yeah, and like
understand.
I've done readings for triple split, but I don't have like a ton of advice. The other thing that's interesting is that me being a fifth line, just to go back to lines,
Mm.
I have to give practical advice, or people feel betrayed,
Yeah.
because like it's one thing to say like this and this and this story, but if I don't like keep saying something practical, like that's one of the points is like you will then have I want you to have practical things like practical things to notice, practical things to try.
Yeah, and I like that practical.
Yeah.
I want it like that.
Yeah. And then the other thing so here's something else about triple split, and I have not verified this, but I've heard that triple split is really healthy when it's moving to different places and taking in different people and basically being wired up in different ways. Compared to some people would look at this and they would think, and I've never heard a triple split say this, but other types might look and they go, well, don't you just want one person who connects everything? Triple split's like, no, that's hell. Like being stuck on a desert island with one person who wires up everything is like fixing you in one way. The triple split is actually made to be like this tumbler of like different things. So it's actually really healthy to be going different places. So I've heard like, if you want to, maybe even in your case, to get clarity about a decision, go visit a few different friends and travel to different places.
I need to move around.
Exactly. It's like designed to move and designed to like sample different people and different ways of connecting and different parts. I've also heard it said that you have three different. You're going in three different directions at once. I don't know how that. I don't know how that works, but
I don't know either. I just do it.
Yeah, exactly.
It was yesterday when we talked about astrology and we reviewed as things and also what you're doing professionally. Then I see how many ways I'm going right now. And I can't say, and all of them are good. I can't say something as I should exclude something. So it's. Then I go to that thinking that just let the time show what the decision will be.
Yeah, if you can kind of go through this process. Yeah, so there's definitely that process there. So the other interesting thing is I'm not entirely sure how the bridging gates play out in terms of not self. Like if you have, so it's really, really simple to me when someone has just one split, like they have two different areas of the chart that are split, and they have a single bridging gate, meaning like there's one gate that's missing. In that case, that person feels, if only I had this gate, everything would be different. And they actually can get so obsessed with having that. You can find people that are totally obsessed with that. I know someone whose bridging gate is 52, which is stillness. Stillness is about finding stillness. This means that she's missing that gate, and she has a split in another part, and that's the one missing part. And she meditates for hours every day and is like obsessed with finding stillness. Like, if only I could find it. Now, the way the not self works is it's going to make certain obsessions, right? And so I don't actually know, and I've never read anything about if these bridging gates work the same way or not. I mean, I kind of don't know if they would. I mean, maybe they will. So I will tell you what the not self splits would be, but this might not apply.
Yeah, I understand.
It really might not. Okay, so the bridging gates are 20 because it connects, 20. I'm just going to kind of say these to myself so I can notice them. 10, 15, 2, and 35. 20, 10, 15, 2, and 35. Yeah, I think that's all of them. That's all of them. So if I were going to, I don't know if this will apply to you or not, but if I were going to describe this not self theme to somebody that just had them as normal split, what I would say is so the not self of the generator is all going to be about frustration. It's going to be about frustration because generators can get so frustrated. They can feel like they're getting so much resistance from everything, and they're just like frustrated that they're yearning for the satisfaction that comes from like finally getting it what you want, or not even what you want, but just like it's just like a feeling of satisfaction. And so that's the basic dichotomy. That's the basic duality. And different types have different ones, which is interesting to think about. Because doesn't everybody want satisfaction? But I'm a
Mm.
generator. So,
Mm.
so the funny thing though is that the frustration that is the not self theme of the generator, on the one hand, it comes from not following the process. Like if you follow your emotional clarity, coming to clarity to make decisions, you'll be satisfied. And same for me, if I follow my sacral authority where someone's like, do you want to do this? And I'm like, uh-huh. Like I will find satisfaction. I will. So that's what leads to it. And I get frustrated when I don't. But then ironically, the not self is always trying to avoid frustration. So avoiding frustration is also one of its themes. It's like frustration and trying to avoid it. And it's weird that I catch myself sometimes basically like assuming I'm going to be frustrated. I'm almost like PTSD for frustration or something. Like oh, this will be a fun conference, but I'll probably just be frustrated by this and this. Like I just kind of assume it. So if I were going to do a reading with these gates, I would basically be saying, each one of these gates is going to be something the mind, the not self, is saying, I can avoid frustration if. So I already mentioned 35. I can avoid frustration if I have experience. If I go out there and get those experiences.
Yes.
I want to have that adventure. I want to have that excitement. I want to have had the experience. I need that experience, and then I can avoid frustration. Yeah. 2 is about having a direction in life. So it can be, I can avoid frustration as long as I know where I'm going, as long as I have a trajectory, as long as I have experiences that help to give me direction, you can kind of combine them. 15 is about going to extremes and also being able to withstand extremes, and then learning to be temperate, or whatever the term is. So it's basically like being able to handle really extreme behavior, like handling other people being super extreme with you, and then learning how to kind of go in the middle path. So this could be, I can avoid frustration as long as I can handle other people being extreme. I can avoid frustration as long as I can have extreme experiences that give me a sense of direction. Then I'll avoid frustration. 10 is about who you are, really. It's about, because this whole G center is about self, but 10 in particular is going to be yourself and your behavior to a degree, and then 20 is what you're doing, and 57 is the gate of knowing. So it's kind of like knowing who you are and knowing what you're doing. So this would be like, if I can avoid frustration if I really discover who I am, if I know who I am, if I can know deeply who I am, and if I really know what I'm doing. And I don't want to not know what I'm doing. I don't want to just do something because then I'll be frustrated. I have to know what I'm doing and be aware of it and really understand it deeply and be really smart about it. And I have to know who I am. And if I do those things, and if I can handle the extremes, and if I get the experience, then I can avoid frustration. So that's kind of how I would normally do it. Now, I don't know if that's going to play out the same way for you as triple split, but you can see it really obviously in some cases, like my friend who I mentioned who only has one gate, stillness. So obvious, because in her case, all she wants is stillness. It's like her life, her entire life is that. In this case, it's a little bit, there's multiple of them, and I don't know if one of them might be preferred, others might not. It's hard to really know exactly how that's going to play out. So then, and we'll close on the not self themes of the undefined centers. And so the 3 undefined centers that you have here.
Yes.
So each of these undefined centers are where we take in other people. We take in things from them. And we absorb from them. And it's actually the potential for the greatest wisdom that we have is the wisdom of basically once we don't identify with this or follow its not self theme of letting it make decisions for us, we start to really see clearly through it. So just to give you an example of that, the head has a not self theme of thinking about things that don't matter, particularly trying to answer other people's questions or solve other people's problems or get rid of other people's confusion, or like someone comes to you and they're like, do you know anything about how I could get a visa to go to Australia? And you're like, well, let me Google it for you. I'll think about it and let me help you figure it out. Trying to solve their questions, right? So once that's not happening as much, it changes, and then we can actually just watch with it. Like we can see, and it's actually, we can see like who's inspiring or not, who inspires us, whose ideas do we like, who, you know, because we're no longer pressuring ourselves to have to think about it and solve it. You actually, 2 of your 3 undefined centers are pressure centers. There are only 2 pressure centers, the head and the root. And they're similar in that they're both felt as this intense pressure to have to do something. And so the head pressure is the pressure basically to be free of that mental pressure, to think. It's the pressure to think. It's the pressure to try to think about it and to have to come up with, you know, basically to be really busy and have a busy mind in order to try to get free from that. The root pressure is about pressure to get things done, and it's kind of like an adrenaline pressure. And then the third one that you have is the ajna, and the ajna is not a pressure center; it's an awareness center, and that's actually going to be the foundation of the not self for you. So the not self centers are in a hierarchy from strongest to weakest, and the ajna is going to be the strongest one that you have. So this is going to be kind of the core. And then the head is going to be in the middle, and then the root is going to be the outermost layer. So what this means is that the theme of the ajna is going to be the deepest, innermost dilemma, around the not self, and it's going to be basically around, in this case, trying to come up with answers and trying to alleviate suspicion or doubt. Because 4 is about it's about answering questions, and the undefined ajna theme is pretending to be certain or trying to be certain. So at this core level, there's going to be I can avoid frustration as long as I'm certain. I can avoid frustration as long as I have the answer. I can avoid frustration as long as I can get rid of any skepticism or doubt by being certain of what to do, or certain of what's true. It's trying to find certainty. This is the core. But it's not going to be showing this to people. Other people won't necessarily see that. What they'll see is the undefined root, because that's like the least strong, the weakest one. So basically, it's like that's kind of how it works. When you look at the undefined centers, they're like layers of them. And this is getting towards the end because I don't want to inundate you too much. We can always follow up if we want. But this is like the real dilemmas of, you know, how I just want to kind of illustrate how this works for a moment. So with the root, as what other people see, you have a completely open root. What they're going to actually... So what's funny is when it's completely open and it has totally open channels like this, that's actually usually a bit of denial. So I'm not saying that you would do this, but the not self theme is going to be kind of like the root, the undefined root is typically always in a hurry to get things done, to be free of that pressure. But when it's so open like this, it might be a variation of I'm not in a hurry, everyone else is in a hurry kind of thing. Like they're always hurrying to get things done, or stuff like that. You know, like I don't have too much pressure. I can handle the stress. Other people can't handle the stress. I'm not pressuring myself too much. Other people pressure themselves too much, or something. And it wants to upgrade. No, cancel. Yeah, and so essentially when it's so open like this, it's actually very vulnerable to being pressured by others. And so, you know, what I would say with the undefined root is basically as you disidentify from it and go, I have to get this done, or I have to do these things, it'll become easier and easier to notice that and to notice that sort of adrenaline feeling, and then to just let it go. So instead of like having, because what I noticed for people that have the undefined root, they often have to get a bunch of things done before they can relax. Like they have a hard time relaxing when there's still things. Now I have defined root. So with my defined root, you know, there can be a big deadline and I can be like, you know what? I need a break. I'm going to go for a walk. And I'll go for a walk and I'll relax with a huge deadline looming because I know that I need to relax because it's like self-care. It's a self-care thing. And so, it's basically realizing that you can notice that pressure. You can even you can kind of enjoy that, but it's realizing that you don't have to hurry. A good question to ask, am I always in a hurry or am I hurrying now? And then because it's so open, it might be the feeling that other people are in a hurry or other people are stressed out. And so it might not really be noticing your stress levels as much. Like you might even go, you know what, I'm gonna notice my stress levels, and I'm gonna like do things like to relax more and whatever that is, But ultimately, as a not self theme, this is not going to be very strong. This is going to be what other people see. The really strong one is the ajna, which is the pretending to be certain or trying to be certain. So that's kind of one of these core themes where, a good question to ask is like, do I need to be certain, or why do I feel I need to be certain? Because there's the whole feeling of I can avoid frustration if I'm certain, but that's not true. The thing that makes you avoid frustration is trusting this down here, this mechanical process, not trusting this up here, And so the other thing, when you have a gate pointed at an empty gate, like see you have like the 11 is not activated and then 56 is pointing at it. Okay. That works similar to the splits, to the bridging gates of splits, where people often feel that something is missing. So you might feel that you're not good enough or don't have enough in that way. So gate 11 is the gate of ideas. So you might feel like, if only I had more ideas. If only I was able to come up with more ideas for what to do in this situation, then I could avoid frustration. So like, I have to have the answers and I wish I had more ideas. And then when you have totally open channels like this, there can be the denial thing. It can also feel like you have to do it on your own. Like nobody else will be there to help you with it. So
that's I've noticed.
With these open ones in particular, like like all these open ones down here, like nobody is actually there to help you get stuff done. Maybe like I have to get it done myself.
And I have stuff that maybe people around me can't do. So I have to do it because I have knowledge of something. Yeah. And I feel that I just went through this with Top yesterday. What I have to get an assistant that can do the things that I don't need to do, because the practical things. I always attract people that have this, and this. And especially this route, because they help me to organize my life.
Totally.
So I can like survive,
Yeah. Well, but that's
need an assistant.
But there's going to be a feeling that nobody can really help with that. Like that's what's so funny. Like there's going to be a feeling like I have to do it, and I better hurry up and get it done myself because nobody else actually, because everybody else is too slow or everybody else is too like whatever. They don't really know how to do it. So anytime you see a totally open channel like that, like you can kind of do this a number of ways. Like for instance, 61 is about knowing. And so 24 is about going over the same thing again and again and again. And so like to really know something, you oftentimes have to like think about it over and over and over again. Well, with that whole channel open, it might be like, I can avoid frustration as long as I think about this thing. I need to really think about it over and over until I'm certain. Okay. And nobody else will help me because they won't stay with it. They won't, they are not going to keep thinking about it. They're not going to, and they don't really know anyway. Yeah. So it's funny how because it's the gate of knowing and it's the gate of returning. It's the same thing again and again. And when it's totally open like that, it's feeling like nobody else is really going to do that. Like it's up to me. I have to do it. And then I'll be free of the mental pressure. And then I'll be sure. And then I will not be frustrated. So I'm glad we can laugh about this because sometimes when I get to the not self, it's very dark. Sometimes when
but I've been so deep shit with my sixth line already. So just laughing about it. I can't get worse than I've been through.
Good. Yeah, no, that's true. Sixth line gets. I mean. 6 lines are like, when I hear the stories, I'm just,
Yeah, it's like really like a few times you have to like put yourself down. Nothing's left of you. Like nothing, just... And especially that Saturn return, after the Saturn return, those years, like you told, 7, 8 years behind that. That's tough. That's really
Yeah.
like losing everything except yourself.
Yeah.
So you really have to do the transformation.
Yeah.
Or die, or do it. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think so. I think so.
That's very interesting.
Well,
This was a long reading.
yeah. I think we're
You're
we're
totally
good.
exhausted.
Oh no, that was fantastic. So if you have any
This is wonderful.
any questions, any follow up, anything at all, I will send you this audio, and we
How
can.
much is this?
Audio is 1 hour 30.
Yeah, but how money?
Well, for you it's free because this is an overview reading. So